I'm begging you, hurry up. The rancher took a step closer and did the unthinkable. The desert was a furnace of gold and silence, the horizon trembling in the weight of the heat. A lone horse stood tethered near a dying palm, its breath slow, patient. Beside it knelt a man, broad-shouldered, sun-worn, with the steady stillness of someone who had learned to listen more than he spoke. His hat shadowed eyes that had seen too much. Before him, at the base of the tree, a young woman sat in the dust, her skin streaked with blood and sand, her breath trembling as if every exhale might shatter her. Please, I'm begging you, she whispered, voice barely holding together. Hurry up. He didn't move at first. The wind pushed the tall grass around them, the sun melting lower, and the world felt like it was watching. His hand twitched toward his belt, then froze. Her eyes, wild, broken, and still defiant, met his. You think I don't want to? He said quietly, almost to himself. You think this is easy for me? The horse snorted, restless. The desert was swallowing light, the orange sky bruising into crimson. He looked at her again. She was too pale now. The blood on her leg wasn't drying, it was spreading. He could see where the bullet had grazed her, the wound raw, angry. He'd chased off the men who did this, but not before they'd left their mark on her, not before the nightmare began. Do it, she said again, her voice breaking. You promised. You said you would end it if I couldn't. Her words fell apart. He looked away, toward the far ridge where the sun had burned itself out. His throat tightened. There's another way, he said, his tone low, desperate for belief. You'll make it. I'll get you to the ranch. You'll see morning. She laughed bitterly, the sound jagged as shattered glass. Morning. She shook her head. You don't understand. They'll come back. You don't know what they did. Her body trembled, but her gaze stayed locked on him. If you can't save me, then keep your word. The words struck him harder than any bullet could. He stood slowly, dusting his palms on his jeans, and looked down at her. There was no sound now, just the long sigh of the wind through the dry grass and the distant cry of something dying out on the plains. The weight of his revolver felt like a sin on his hip. He took a step closer. She flinched, not from fear, but from the pain in her leg. His boots crunched on the brittle ground, and he knelt in front of her. He could smell the copper tang of blood, the sweat, the sand that clung to her torn shirt. Her lips trembled, her fingers digging into the earth as if trying to hold on to something she could still control. He reached into his coat and pulled out his canteen. Drink, he said softly. She hesitated. Why? Because if I'm gonna do this, he said, eyes steady, you're not gonna go thirsty. Her eyes filled, but she took it, gulping water like someone who'd forgotten what mercy tasted like. When she finished, he wiped the blood from her chin with the edge of his sleeve. His movements were gentle, too gentle for a man who might have to take a life in the next breath. The sky dimmed to violet, the last sunlight bleeding across her face. He exhaled sharply. You should hate me for what I'm about to do. I don't, she whispered. I already hate what they made me. That broke him. He looked at her again, truly looked. Beneath the dirt, the blood, there was something still fighting to live. And suddenly, the idea of ending her was unbearable. He holstered his gun, stood, and said through clenched teeth, no. I'm not doing it, not like this. She tried to protest, but he scooped her up before she could speak. She gasped, her hands clutching at his shirt. Hold on, he said, his voice rough. He carried her to the horse, lifted her carefully into the saddle despite her protests. The animal shifted under the added weight. The ranch was miles away, but he didn't think about that. He thought only of the firelight that could keep her alive, the warm wood smell of home, the chance, however small, that she might survive the night. The ride back was endless. The stars rose, sharp and cold, and the desert air turned cruel. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her head sometimes falling against his chest. Every time he felt her go limp, his heart stopped. When they finally reached the ranch, the cabin windows glowed faintly with the promise of fire. He swung down, lifted her again, and carried her inside. The room was quiet but alive with warmth. Flames danced in the hearth, shadows flickering over the rough stone walls. He laid her gently on the couch, her breath shallow but still there. He poured whiskey over her wound, and she screamed, but it was a living scream, the kind that meant she hadn't given up. "You said you couldn't save me," she gasped between sobs. "I was wrong," he said, tying the bandage tight. "You're tougher than you think." She laughed weakly, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. "You don't even know my name." He paused. "Don't need to. You're alive. That's all I care about." She looked into the fire, her eyes reflecting its restless glow. "You should have left me out there." "Not a chance," he said. "Not while I still have a bullet left." Outside, the storm gathered, the kind that carried both dust and destiny. He stood by the window, watching the dark horizon. "They'll come for you," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "Then what?" He turned to her, and something in his face changed, a shadow of fear mixed with something deeper, older. "Then I'll do the unthinkable." Days passed. She healed slowly, strength creeping back into her limbs. She wore his old shirt, her hair loose, her bare feet padding across the wooden floor. Sometimes she'd find him outside at dawn, leaning on the fence, watching the light break over the desert. He rarely spoke of that night, but she saw it in his eyes, the weight of the promise he'd refused to keep. One evening, she brought him coffee, standing beside him as the sky bled orange again. "You never told me why you saved me," she said softly. He smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "Because I once begged someone to hurry up," he said. "And they didn't. They gave me time to live instead." Her hand trembled as she set the cup down. "And did you?" He turned to her. The silence between them stretched like eternity. "I'm still trying." Later that night, when the fire was low and the world was asleep, he found her sitting in the same chair where he'd first laid her down. The wound was healing, but the memories weren't. She stared into the flames like they were the only thing keeping her sane. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under his boots. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." She looked up at him, eyes haunted but alive. "You did the unthinkable," she whispered. "You gave me a reason to want tomorrow." He didn't answer. He just reached for her hand, rough and calloused, and she didn't pull away. The fire cracked, sending sparks up like stars caught in a storm, and for the first time since that desperate plea in the desert, the night didn't feel so endless. And outside, under the watchful sky, the wind carried only silence. No gunfire, no ghosts, only the echo of a promise kept in the most unexpected way. The fire had burned low, its embers pulsing faintly like a heartbeat against the hush of the night. The woman's hand trembled slightly in his, the connection between them fragile, new, and wordless. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls, carrying the cry of coyotes and the rustle of tumbleweed. It was a lonely sound, the kind that reminded a man just how far he was from salvation. She looked at him across the flickering glow, her eyes tracing the scars that ran along his forearm, the quiet power in his shoulders, the exhaustion that clung to him like dust. "You saved me," she said softly, her voice a whisper meant for the dark. "But what if that wasn't what I needed?" He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. "Then I'll figure out what is." She studied him, her face half in shadow, half in light, torn between gratitude and the terror that still lived behind her ribs. "You don't know what you're promising." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I've made worse promises." The night settled heavier around them. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered across the desert, the slow warning of a storm. She shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The rancher rose silently and threw another log onto the fire. The sparks rose, brief stars burning out before they reached the ceiling. He walked to the window. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of darkness under a fractured moon. His reflection stared back at him, a man with too many ghosts behind his eyes. He thought of the men he'd chased away earlier that day, the ones who had left her bleeding in the sand. Men like that didn't just vanish. They'd regroup. They'd come for what they thought belonged to them. And next time, they wouldn't miss. He turned back to her. She was watching him quietly, her body smaller under the blanket but her eyes sharper now, alive again, and afraid. "They'll come," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "They always do." He nodded slowly. "Let them." She tilted her head, a faint trace of disbelief crossing her face. "You talk like a man with nothing to lose." He smiled without humor. "That's exactly what I am." The silence stretched between them again, deep and uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. "Why?" Why risk yourself for me? You could have left me there, and no one would have blamed you." He hesitated. "Because I couldn't stand to hear someone beg for mercy again." Her breath caught. "You've heard that before." He nodded, the memory flashing across his face like lightning. Too quick to see, too painful to hold. "A long time ago. A girl not much older than you. The world didn't give her a second chance. I figured maybe this was mine to do right." She said nothing, only looked at him with something fragile and unreadable in her expression, something close to respect. He poured her a small glass of whiskey and handed it over. "It'll help with the pain," he said. She took it with both hands, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. The touch sent a spark through him, sharp as the crack of a rifle. She looked down quickly, pretending not to notice, but her heartbeat betrayed her, fast, uneven. He stepped back, forcing space between them. "You should rest. There's a spare room at the end of the hall." "I'd rather stay near the fire," she murmured. He hesitated, then nodded. "Suit yourself." He took his rifle from the corner and began checking it, his movements deliberate, mechanical. She watched him silently, the rhythm of the oiling and loading somehow comforting. The metallic click of the chamber closing echoed softly through the cabin, the sound of a man preparing for what the dawn might bring. Hours passed. The storm broke across the plains, heavy rain beating against the windows, lightning tearing across the sky. The horse whinnied in the barn, uneasy. The rancher sat near the window, awake, his rifle resting across his knees. Every flash of lightning painted him in white fire, a sentinel caught between duty and damnation. At some point, she drifted into uneasy sleep. He watched her for a moment, the lines of fear softening in her face. She looked impossibly young then, someone who should have been far from gunfire and desert storms. When morning came, the storm had passed. The world outside was washed clean, the desert glistening under a pale sun. He stepped outside, the air cool and sharp. Mud clung to his boots as he walked to the fence, scanning the horizon. And there, faint, but clear, were tracks. 3 horses, headed straight toward the ranch. His stomach tightened. He went back inside quietly, grabbing his coat. She was awake, her blanket sliding from her shoulders as she sat up. "They're here, aren't they?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded. "Stay inside. Don't open that door for anyone but me." She stood, limping slightly. "You can't take them all on your own." He gave her a look that silenced her. "You said they always come." "Well, I always finish what I start." Before she could argue, he was gone. The air outside was heavy with tension, the kind that made a man's hands itch toward his holster. The tracks led toward the ridge just north of the property, where the earth rose into a jagged lip of stone. He climbed slowly, every step calculated, every sense alive. At the top, he saw them, 3 riders in black dusters, rifles slung, their faces hidden beneath hats. The same men. He recognized the one in front, a scar down the jaw, eyes like burnt glass. The one who had smiled when she screamed. "Didn't think we'd find you this quick," the scarred man called, his grin crooked and cold. "We just came to take back what's ours." The rancher's voice was low, steady. "She's not yours. Never was. Then she's yours now." The man sneered. "That makes this personal." It already was. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet earth and gun oil. The men dismounted slowly, spreading out. 3 against 1. Good odds if you had nothing to lose. The rancher exhaled and drew. The world exploded in thunder. His first shot dropped the one on the left, the second grazed another's shoulder. The third man returned fire, the bullet tearing a splinter from the rock beside his face. He rolled behind a boulder, heart pounding. Another shot cracked through the air. He felt the sting of shrapnel cut his cheek. He peeked out. 2 left, both closing in. He took a deep breath, counted their steps, then rose. The second man went down before he could blink, clutching his chest and falling into the mud. The scarred man fired back, the bullet grazing the rancher's side, burning hot. The pain ripped through him, but he stayed upright. He fired again, missed. The scarred man ducked behind his horse. The animal reared, panicking. The rancher moved forward, ignoring the blood soaking into his shirt. "You think you're some kind of hero?" The scarred man shouted. "You're just another fool who thinks he can change how the West works." Maybe, the rancher said, his voice hardening. But you're one I can bury. The next shot echoed across the canyon, final and absolute. The scarred man staggered, his pistol slipping from his fingers, his eyes wide with disbelief. He fell to his knees, then forward, his body hitting the dirt with a dull thud. The rancher stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. The rain began again. Soft this time, almost gentle, washing the blood into the earth. When he returned to the cabin, she was waiting at the door, barefoot, eyes wide. The sight of the blood on his side made her gasp. "You're hurt," she cried. "It's nothing," he muttered, but his knees buckled. She caught him as he fell, her hands pressing against the wound. "Nothing," she said fiercely. "You're bleeding like a damn river." He winced as she dragged him to the couch, tearing a strip from her dress to press against the wound. Her hands were shaking, her voice unsteady. "You could have died out there." He smiled weakly. "Wasn't the first time I came close." She pressed harder. "Don't talk like that." He reached up, catching her wrist. "You care now." Her breath hitched. "Don't start with me." Their eyes met. Fire against fire. She looked away first, tears cooling but not falling. "I just don't want to lose the only good thing that's happened to me in a long time." He said nothing. The silence between them was heavier than words could ever be. Hours later, after she'd cleaned and stitched his wound, he dozed fitfully by the fire. She sat nearby, staring into the flames. Her mind replayed the sound of gunfire, the thunder in his voice, the way he'd stood between her and death without hesitation. When he stirred, she spoke softly. "What happens now?" He opened his eyes slowly, his gaze finding hers. "Now, we wait. There's always someone else coming." She frowned. "You mean they're friends?" He nodded. "Men like that don't travel alone." She sighed, the weight of dread settling over her. "So what? We just wait here until they find us?" He looked at her steadily. "No, we make them wish they never did." Days passed. He recovered slowly, though every movement still hurt. She helped where she could, feeding the horses, patching bullet holes in the barn door, boiling water for his bandages. The rhythm of survival bound them together, quiet but undeniable. Sometimes, at dusk, they would sit outside on the porch, the sun sinking behind the hills. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, humming with something they didn't dare name. One evening, as the desert glowed amber and gold, she spoke. "What will you do when they come?" He turned to her. "The same thing I always do." "And what's that?" He smiled faintly. "End it." She looked down at her hands. "You can't keep living like this, always waiting for a fight, always alone." He watched her, the light catching her hair, turning it to bronze. "Maybe I'm not alone anymore." She froze, then looked at him, really looked at him. His face was tired, scarred, but there was something softer there now. Something she didn't expect to find in a man who'd spent his life chasing ghosts. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "I know enough. And if I leave?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Then I'll walk you out myself," he said. "And hope you find peace before I do." Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned back to the horizon, her eyes wet, her heart a storm. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered outside, the moon high and cold above her. The ranch lay silent, the world drenched in silver light. She walked toward the barn, drawn by something she couldn't name. Inside, she found him awake, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. "You should rest," he said without looking up. "So should you." He chuckled softly. "I've forgotten how." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "You never told me your name," she said. He looked up. "Jack." She smiled faintly. "Doesn't suit you." "Never did," he replied. "What about you?" She hesitated, as if saying it would make it real. "Clara." He nodded slowly, testing it in the air. "Clara, that fits." She watched him quietly, the lamplight casting shadows across his face. "You're not what I expected," she said. "And what did you expect?" "A man who kills without thinking." "I used to be," he admitted. "Now I just kill when I have to." She took another step closer, her voice softening. "And me, was I something you had to save?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No, you were something I couldn't let die." Her breath caught. The air between them felt heavy, dangerous. The lamplight flickered. He stood slowly, the space between them vanishing. For a moment, neither spoke. Her eyes searched his face, his hand hesitated near her shoulder, then he stopped, stepped back. "Not like this," he muttered. "You've been through enough." She nodded, tears burning in her eyes. "You always stop yourself. Because I know what it costs when I don't." They stood in silence, the night pressing in around them. Then, from outside, a sound. Hoofbeats. His head snapped toward the door, instincts taking over. He blew out the lamp, plunging them into darkness. "Get down," he whispered. Clara crouched behind a stall as he peered through a crack in the wall. Lanterns flickered in the distance. Riders, at least half a dozen, moving fast. He turned to her, his voice low, urgent. "It's them." Her heart pounded. "Jack, listen to me," he said firmly. "If they breach the barn, you run through the back, take the horse, and ride east. Don't stop till you hit the river." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. He looked at her, something breaking behind his eyes. "You will if you want to live." The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, the ground trembling beneath them. He loaded his rifle, cocked the hammer. "Stay low." The barn doors shuddered as the first bullet tore through them. The horses screamed. Clara covered her ears, the chaos exploding around her. Jack returned fire, the muzzle flashes lighting his face like bursts of firelight. Gunfire tore through the night, echoing off the canyon walls. He moved like a ghost, precise, unyielding, the kind of man who'd learned to make peace with violence long ago. Clara crawled to the back, heart hammering, ready to flee, but she couldn't do it. She couldn't leave him. She grabbed his spare revolver from the table and ran to his side. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "Helping," she yelled back. He wanted to argue, but there was no time. Two men rushed the door. Clara fired, missed the first, hit the second square in the chest. The shock on her face was immediate, raw. "You okay?" he asked, reloading. She nodded shakily. "I think so." The fight raged for what felt like hours. When the last echo died, the night fell silent again, thick, suffocating silence. Smoke hung in the air, the smell of gunpowder and blood sharp and bitter. Jack leaned against the wall, breathing hard, blood on his sleeve again. Clara dropped the revolver, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "They're dead," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "For now." She turned to him, tears streaking her face. "How long can this go on?" "As long as it has to," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, Jack, you can't save me forever." He met her eyes, his expression carved in stone. "Then I'll die trying." And outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying the faint echo of more riders far in the distance. The west wasn't done with them yet. The night was still burning from the chaos that had just passed. The barn smelled of smoke, iron, and sweat, the kind of scent that clings to a man's soul long after the fight ends. The dead men lay scattered among the straw and the mud, their guns cooling beside them, their blood mixing with the rain that had begun to fall through the bullet holes in the roof. Jack stood there, his breath coming hard and uneven, the rifle slipping slightly in his grip. Clara was on her knees beside one of the bodies, her face pale, her hands shaking. She wasn't crying, not yet. The shock had turned her to stone. He reached for her shoulder. "Don't look at them," he said softly. "They're not worth it." Her voice came out raw. "They were monsters." "Yeah," he murmured, "but they were still men. That's the hardest part of it." She turned to him then, her eyes bright with tears that finally broke free. "How do you live with it? With all of this?" He hesitated, then crouched beside her. "You don't. You just keep going until the weight doesn't crush you anymore." For a long time, neither spoke. The wind outside grew colder, the first breath of dawn creeping over the desert. The storm clouds broke apart, revealing a strip of pale light on the horizon, fragile, almost shy, but real. Jack stood slowly, offering her his hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." She took it, her fingers trembling against his, and let him pull her to her feet. They stepped out into the early morning, the ranch stretching before them, quiet, wounded, but alive. The land smelled of rain and smoke. It was beautiful in a brutal sort of way, the kind of beauty that hurt to look at. Clara looked up at him. "They'll send more, won't they?" He nodded once. They always do. And you'll fight again. If I have to. She took a shaky breath. I don't want to run anymore. He looked at her then. Really looked. The dirt on her skin. The fear still hiding behind her courage. The way she stood with her shoulders squared despite the trembling. Then don't, he said. Not this time. She stared at him, uncertain. What are you saying? I'm saying, he replied, we stop being the hunted. The words hung between them, heavy with promise and danger. He turned toward the horizon, the sun beginning to rise over the ridges, painting everything in gold. There's a town south of here, he said. Mesa Hollow. Sheriff, there's an old friend. If we make it, we can put an end to this, for good. Clara frowned. You trust the law. He smiled faintly. I trust the man. Sometimes that's enough. They saddled the horses in silence. Clara moved with determination now. Her fear burned down to something sharper, a quiet fury that matched his own. When they finally mounted up, she looked back at the ranch. Smoke still curled from the barn's broken roof. It's strange, she said. For a place that almost killed me, it feels like home. He met her gaze. Maybe that's what home is. The place that almost breaks you but doesn't. They rode through the open desert, the world still damp from the storm. The air was cool, sweet with the scent of wet sage. For hours they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was alive, humming with everything they didn't need to say. By the time the sun reached its peak, they saw it, Mesa Hollow, shimmering in the distance like a mirage. Small, worn, the kind of town that didn't ask questions. As they entered the main street, heads turned. A few men paused their card games. The blacksmith froze mid-swing. Jack felt the eyes, the weight of them, but kept riding. He stopped in front of the sheriff's office and dismounted slowly. The door creaked open before he could knock. A man in a tan coat stepped out, older, weathered, with eyes that had seen the same kind of hell. Jack Hawthorne, the sheriff said, a grin flickering across his face. Hell, I thought you were dead. Almost was, Jack replied. Got work for you. The sheriff's eyes shifted to Clara. You bring trouble with you. Not by choice, she said quietly. The sheriff nodded, his smile fading. Come inside. Tell me what happened. They did everything, from the ambush to the ranch, the men who wouldn't stop hunting her. When it was done, the sheriff sat back, sighing deeply. Sounds like you two stirred up a hornet's nest. Jack leaned forward. We didn't stir it, we just stopped running from it. The sheriff nodded slowly, then stood. All right, I'll send word to the marshals. But you both need to rest. You look half dead. They left the office and walked down to the edge of town, where the desert met the open sky. The light was turning orange again, the same color it had been the night they met. Clara stopped, looking out at the horizon. Do you think it ever ends? She asked quietly. He followed her gaze. No, not really. But sometimes, you find a moment where it feels like it could. She turned to him, searching his face. And is this one of those moments? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took her hand, rough, trembling, but real, and placed it against his chest. If it isn't, he said, then it's the closest I've ever come. She smiled through her tears. You always talk like a man who's already gone. He chuckled softly. Maybe I am, but not tonight. They stood there as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long behind them. The town around them was quiet, the wind gentle. For a brief, impossible heartbeat, the world was still. Then, far off in the distance, a sound, faint but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Clara stiffened. Jack. He didn't move, didn't even blink. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a line of dust was rising, fast, relentless. They found us, she whispered. He reached for his gun, his jaw tightening. Yeah, they did. Clara turned to him, fear and defiance warring in her voice. What do we do? He looked at her, the firelight of the setting sun painting his face in golden blood. We finish it. She nodded once, the tremor in her hands fading. The two of them stood side by side, framed against the dying light, a woman who had found her strength in hell and a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. As the riders closed in, the first wind of their charge sweeping through the town, Jack looked at her one last time. No matter what happens, he said, you ride west. Don't look back. She met his eyes, her voice steady. Not without you. He smiled. Small, fierce, real. Then I guess we ride together. The air grew thick with dust and thunder. The sound of hooves filled the earth. Jack drew his revolver. Clara reached for hers, and as the first shot split the silence of Mesa Hollow, the West itself seemed to hold its breath, because two souls had decided they would no longer run, no longer beg, no longer break. Whatever came next would be written in fire and blood and courage. And though the night would soon swallow them again, the world would remember the echo of their stand, the rancher and the woman who refused to die quietly beneath the sun.